Dude, you don't want that on. For sure.
In 1776, people rebelled, fought, and died to win their freedom from one of those, and one of those freedoms was the right to vote. Franklin D. Roosevelt said, "Nobody will ever deprive the American people of the right to vote except the American people themselves. And the only way they could do this is by not voting." In the Revolutionary War, 50,000 Americans died or were wounded fighting for their freedom from Britain. In some cases, we have been fighting for that freedom ever since. During the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 1960s, voting rights activists in the South were subjected to various forms of mistreatment and violence. One event that outraged many Americans occurred on March 7, 1965, when peaceful participants in a voting rights march from Selma, Alabama, to the state capitol in Montgomery were met by Alabama state troopers who attacked them with nightsticks, tear gas, and whips after they refused to turn back. Some protesters were severely beaten, and others ran for their lives. The incident was captured on national television. When we beat Britain, we won the right to vote, but that right was only extended to a limited group of people. It took centuries for every American to gain the right to vote. In 1923, the National Women's Party proposed an amendment to the Constitution that would prohibited all discrimination on the basis of sex. The so-called Equal Rights Amendment has never been ratified. It took entire movements for women and minorities to win the right to vote, such as the women's suffrage movement. Black people and women were not given the right to vote until the 20th century. On Election Day in 1920, millions of American women exercised their right to vote for the very first time. It took activists nearly 100 years to win that right. Other policies were put into place to keep people from being able to vote. Poll taxes, literacy tests, segregation, even physical and violent intimidation has been used to control the voting rights in America. In 1965, there was the passage of the Voting Rights Act. The act banned the use of literacy tests, provided the federal government oversight on voter registration in areas where less than 50% of the non-white population had not registered to vote. And it also authorized the U.S. Attorney General to investigate the use of poll taxes in state and local elections. Those taxes left poor people without a voice. After the passage of the Voting Rights Act, before the passage of the Voting Rights Act, there were 6 African American members in the U.S. House of Representatives and no African Americans in the U.S. Senate. By 1971, after the passage, there were 13 members of the House and 1 African American member of the Senate. It took a lot of sweat, blood, and tears to win the right to vote for every American, yet people still don't let their vote be heard. Just over half of Americans that can vote exercise their right and go and cast their vote. Only 57% of Americans voted in the 2012 presidential election. The population of people with college degrees voted at over 80%. People that are educated are more likely to vote because they understand the importance behind it. Sometimes it's not the person you are voting for, but the ideas and ideals that they stand for. People that voted for Obama did so for various reasons. One of them was for the rights of homosexuals, and they have now the same rights as heterosexuals and are allowed to marry. Other examples are what other countries we may or may not go to war with, trade with other countries, the highways that we build and maintain, and the schools that we send our children to. If you don't think that your vote counts, you're wrong. In 1948, according to classbrain.com, there were 9,247 voting precincts in Ohio. Truman won the state by just 7,107 voters. Had just one Truman voter in each precinct voted for Dewey, then Dewey would have won the state and its 25 electoral votes. Almost 75% of homeowners vote. Voting rights were suppressed in the past with rules and regulations, but now voting is a right for every American. Imagine a country that is working for the voice of the majority, not the money. The Koch brothers want to spend nearly $1 billion in the 2016 elections. On the Democratic side, there are 7 unions that want to top the Koch brothers' contributions. If people don't exercise their right to vote, the money will run the country. The corporate lobbyists will get their way. The average Americans will lose the ability to climb the social ladder. Have you ever heard of the Citizens United decision? It is the Supreme Court ruled that privately held corporations could contribute to election campaigns. That means billionaires could spend as much money as they want to make sure their favorite officials are the ones that will take the office. If you ever do a search on who funds Citizens United, you will fall into a rabbit hole without any answers. The best I could find is the Oxford Club. It's a members-only organization. It reports that it has memberships of 65,000 in more than 110 countries. If you don't vote, your vote will be taken away and replaced by corporations and politically funded biased organizations. Then the only way to make sure your voice is heard is by taking the time and going to vote. We have covered the struggles and tribulations of people fighting for their right to vote. You also know that if you don't vote, chances are corporate lobbyists and the country's wealthiest people will fill those votes for you. What can you do to make sure we as the people decide our own fate? We can take our time to go vote. We can make sure our voices are heard. We can stand up for our individual rights and show that no amount of money will decide our future. We can take our time to go vote. Since the revolution, we have been selective in who can vote, and different groups of people have made sacrifices to win that right to cast their vote and use their voices. Now that is being challenged by those greedy few who want to shape America with what they think is right. Don't let the few decide the rights for all of us. Don't let the corporations use your voice to fill their bank accounts. Go and exercise your right to vote so many of our ancestors have died for. Go and let your voice be heard. If you vote, find a friend who does not, and make sure they fill out their mail-in ballot. Be passionate about your country. Don't let your freedom slip away. Don't let someone else decide the future of your children. Go and cast your vote. Stand up if you're willing to get one other person to vote. In 1776, our future was created from blood and fire. The future has shaped The future was shaped by the voice of free people. We have come so far to make sure every man and woman has a voice since then. Don't be silent. Don't let our freedom be systematically dismantled until we have no choice in our future. There has been blood spilled to give you a voice. Don't let that sacrifice be in vain. Thank you, and I hope this election season everyone finds the time to go and vote.
Johnny was like watching